And for folks who are just joining now, just here's the, whoops. There's the meeting notes. Feel free to put your stuff in the agenda and stuff there. In the yeah, okay, cool. So we could probably get started. Just as a reminder, meetings being recorded will be uploaded to YouTube a little bit later. And also your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. Okay, so we don't really have a whole lot on the agenda for today, nothing specific. But we've still been working on some of the stuff in the documents. And we've been working through trying to kind of get a few more folks who've been working on a few tools to maybe give a demo of some of it. I know that Samsung has built a GitHub, a Jenkins builder. However, the folks who built it from Samsung, they're working out of South Korea, so it's a bit of this meeting is something like 11 p.m. for them or 9 p.m., something like that.
Mike, do you think if we want to see a demo of that, should we just change this meeting as like a one-off to invite them?
Yeah, but we can. I'm trying to get in contact with some of the folks over there. Yeah, I don't speak Korean, and they also don't speak English very much, so there's definitely a little bit of a communication gap there. So I'm trying to figure out even through some other folks who I know who might be able to help bridge the gap there. You know, whether or not they kind of want, you know, would they want to give a demo of it? Do they have any recorded demo? Even, you know, even something like if they recorded a demo and we could just sort of watch it or whatever, that would be cool too. But so far, still working on it.
Gotcha. Cool.
Cool. Any updates from folks on any things in the tooling space?
I got a small one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm starting work on a prototype SLSA policy mechanism for the NPM environment. I reached out to Frederick and some other people in the NPM team. And the plan of record is that I will build something on top, not into the system, but around the system, so that we can prototype policies and policy enforcement to inform a real design for the system. And if other people are interested in working with me on this, then that is great. So that's my short summary. There's no demo at all at this point, obviously.
Oh, cool. I mean, if folks did want, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. If folks are interested in contributing, what's the best way for them to do so?
Just reach out via email. I don't know if that email is known. I will reach at google.com. First name at google.com.
Aaron?
That's it.
Is this Weitzel, is this kind of the demonstration you were giving with the slides a little bit ago as well, related to that from a policy perspective?
It is related to that. Although, yes, and I will just see how far we get with the details. So the main thing is that NPM team is implementing provenance generation, but not policies that actually enforce whether you can upload or install. And I would be adding wrappers, proxies, whatever, to emulate a policy enforcement system.
Nice.
Yeah. Also, I am pretty new with respect to NPM, and so
Cool.
there's a bit of learning.
Cool. Any other updates on anything in the tooling in the space? I know I'm gonna call on Brendan again, just as I'm not Brendan Mitchell. I didn't realize Brendan Lum had already joined as well. On, or actually anybody who might know status of the OCI changes being officially released, and also around any of the tooling that is are the changes to the spec. Is anybody up to date on like some of the common tools and when they might support the new spec?
Yeah, the spec has updates already committed to main, and we've got a release candidate. Second one, we botched the first one, so we're fixing that with another second release candidate out there. It's nothing is messed up on the repo. We just tagged the wrong commit on the release. Happens. And yeah, Reg Client out there has some stuff already. The ORS project is already talking on their side about adding support over there. And I think there's work going on like the distribution repo, which is upstream of groups like Harbor and some others that extend that. So a bunch of effort going on to try to support this. And for those
Cool.
who don't know, if you have a current registry, you don't need to upgrade your registry to use this today. It works using existing objects, just puts a special looking tag in there. It looks really similar to what Cosign does with their tags with the .sig. It just doesn't have a .sig at the end of it. So there's already the syntax and everything to use an existing registry. So if you have tooling out there that wants to use it today, there's nothing stopping you.
Cool. Cool. So there's one other small thing from my end, and I posted it in the meeting notes. There is a paper that was released earlier in the summer, in June, about Gwix, which is, a build system based on Nix. And they do sort of cite some stuff in Salsa in that paper. And there's some interesting, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the stuff in there, because it sort of tries to paint that Salsa is a bit too much on the like, oh, you're trusting the build and trusting the binary, as opposed to verifying. But I believe, one of the goals, maybe not for 1.0, but eventually for Salsa, is to give enough information in, let's say open source, especially Salsa attestations, such that somebody could independently verify by rebuilding and could compare sort of the output of, various Salsa attestations. But just wanted to throw that paper out there, because I do think it still provides a lot of interesting information on good approaches to doing secure builds. And so it might be stuff that, hey, for the folks who are building sort of some of the Salsa builders, it might prove to be, a useful resource there. Okay, so Besides that, there's not a whole lot on the agenda. So there was we could go back to sort of the document we have. Hold on, where did I put it? I have too many tabs. Give me 1 second. The attestation and discovery document here, where we had started going through some of this. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen. My PC's been acting a little weird when I've been sharing my screen lately, so hopefully it doesn't cause any issues. And it's starting to act up. Well, we'll see how long I can. 1 second here. Actually, I'm gonna attempt to. I'll deal with that later. So just a reminder, as we kind of had been going through a lot of this stuff previously, we had started, so I know there's a few folks who have been reaching out to a couple of the different package managers and folks who were running the packaging tools to sort of figure out what are some common patterns that can maybe be shared across those package registries, so that, you know, we can could SLSA perhaps have sort of like a handful of patterns that we can upload to the site as potentials for, you know, hey, you run a package manager, you know, or whatever, you run a package repository, and you want to know what are some common ways for you to distribute SLSA attestations along with the package, you know, with sort of a minimal impact to your tooling and that kind of thing. So that's something that I think we're still kind of been talking through the past couple of times. Something that I think probably still makes sense if folks were sort of interested. And Mark, I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well. I think one of the things that we were talking about was, you know, we have NPM, we have some folks who are talking to Maven, we have folks who are talking to PyPI, we have folks who are talking to all these different things. And then there was kind of a combination of, there's going to be native, obviously, integration where it's like, oh, the, you know, NPM tool is going to eventually know how to pull down attestations. There's most likely going to be certain contexts where you're going to say, great, like this package manager is not going to know anything about SLSA directly, but you can do the SLSA out of band by, you know, when you pull it down, you're going to get it some sort of identifier. You can go to that identifier dot, you know, JSON lines or whatever, to some REST endpoint and be able to pull it down or whatever. But we wanted to kind of see if there's like a handful of just generic suggestions we can make, so that, you know, folks who are looking at this can generally know, like, oh, okay, if I just have a file that lives alongside it at the same, you know, REST endpoint, something like, you know, hash.salsa.jsonl or whatever. Like, is that something that we want to potentially suggest, or should we just really be pushing on the individual package tools to just kind of handle it any way they wanted to handle it? I mean, we don't want to impose, but we wanted to maybe provide a couple of hints and ideas to folks.
In my opinion, I think the file name plus some suffix is a very straightforward way of doing it. So that would be my my primary recommendation. Like, that doesn't work for container images because they don't have file names, but for most other packaging systems like NPM, Python, I don't know enough about Maven, that seems straightforward. I know, Frederick, you mentioned that I think there's some plan to do some API, but if I understand correctly, NPM actually is file name, like you fetch it via some URL, and so you can append the suffix.
Yeah, and in this case, for reasons that I would say comes from the existing APIs we have for managing, let's say, advisories, etc. The plan is to query via package name and version, because that's how it's done for advisories. And so far, we have only looked at like a single endpoint for getting attestations. So currently, we are just planning to have 2 attestations. So as an example, SPOM is not something we're looking at right now.
So for like, I think it's probably worth looking at a specific example. So we could use NPM since we have an expert here. When I look at the package lock file, there's a resolved field that says https registry.npmjs.org / looks like package name / hyphen / file name. Is that the thing that, is that like a fixed API for where to find packages?
I think so. Just to be clear, I'm not an expert in NPM, but I do think you are correct. But that's for fetching the package itself. But as an example, during install, you can also get an advisories for the packages you're installing. So that's done via a separate endpoint that's happening after the installation phase. And then the reason for that, I think, is during install, you kind of need to do, or you may need to do transitive dependency resolution, which happens server side. And based on that, you get sort of the packages back, and then you know what you actually have, and then you can start to get advisories.
I mean, I guess, you know, I would be curious to see the rationale for doing that versus just having it be served at the same path with a suffix. Like I understand how you want to do the query to find all the packages, but once you know what the package is, I would have imagined it would be a simple API. Like you don't even have to make a new endpoint. It's literally just, you're serving just yet another dumb file.
Yeah. That is a good question, and I can't speak for the registry folks, but there was a desire to have this as a separate endpoint. And we were initially looking at sort of piggybacking on the design for the advisory, but the registry folks wanted to take a different path here.
Would it be valuable to have like registry folks from a couple different ecosystems like NPM and PyPI and maybe 1 or 2 others to talk to see if it makes sense to kind of have a common convention? Because I think like none of us here actually work on those things, and so like we could recommend something, but like I think the actual implementers will be like, oh no, that doesn't work for this reason. And like they
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
Thinking through.
We're having some discussions with the Python Packaging Authority at the moment, so maybe we can get them to come along.
Yeah, because like I could see for NPM, like the advisories, I think makes complete sense being a separate endpoint because that information is dynamic. It changes over time, and it's not just it's just not just a plain file. I think there is a question with attestations, and this is probably something that we could recommend one way or the other of, are they immutable? Like once you create a package version, like for example, I'm looking at the package lock file, entities 3.0.1. Once you create entities 3.0.1 and upload attestations, is that fixed for all time? And if you want to create new attestations, you have to do a new version. Or can you add more over time? Because I think that would affect the design as well. I think for, I could see arguments in both ways, like the provenance at upload time doesn't change, like whatever you uploaded with, like that's a fact of the historical. There might be other types of attestations that you might want to know, especially if they're generated by some other party. But then I wonder if actually doing it through the registry is the right path for those, or if it would be better to do some other distribution mechanism. Anyway, Brandon?
When we were looking at it with the registry, even just having the single extension was a little limiting, because you might have more than one, say you're packaging, we were thinking of SBOMs, things like that, but you'll have more than one attestation for a single artifact build of some kind. There'll be multiple steps of the build process that go through or something like that. You're also going to see things like the attestation pushed and then the signature on the attestation. So you'll have multiple tiers as well. And so I'm trying to figure out how that would work in the file system layout as well. So I'm thinking through a handful of different scenarios where some of this might get a little bit over constrictive.
So the recommended format is a bundle. So it's an archive. It's not just a single attestation, and each attestation has the signatures in it. I think design decision, and the current recommendation for in toto is to do JSON lines file, which is one, you serialize the JSON with no new line characters in it, and then put one JSON object or one attestation per line, which is simple to do, but it has the, in my opinion, significant drawback that it only supports JSON. And so if you want to do, say, SBOMs or really anything else that's not JSON, then it doesn't work with that file format unless you kind of jump through hoops. Aaron?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention or think about that bundle you just mentioned, because that will have a listing of all the attestations, right, that are relevant, I think. And then the public key in theory, right, that you can verify that single attestation on that line. Is that right, how that works?
No, I think the PKI is a separate open question.
Okay.
I don't think I mean, you wouldn't want to distribute the public key next to the thing, otherwise it'll be like a self-signed thing. And
Okay.
Except unless the public key is part of a certificate chain, which in turn rolls up to something that you're verifying. But ultimately, the distribution of like the root of trust has to be out of band.
Yeah, that's right. I threw that red herring in, sorry. So the bundle, right, could be maybe our recommendation, right? So we're like providing that bundle with the NPM file essentially, right? And then are those attests? Help me understand quickly as well. Within the bundle on the JSON lines, is the entire amount of data within the attestation in that line? Yeah.
So
okay.
Each, again, in the current recommended format, each line is a DISI envelope, which is a JSON object that contains the payload, which is the statement, the attestation statement, and the signature, and possibly like the certificate chain or any other kind of authentication level stuff, and a type on how to interpret the payload. And then within the payload is the in toto attestation, which has the subject and the predicate, and then the predicate would be like provenance or whatever. Yeah, like all this also. Okay, gotcha. But yeah, I mean, I think it's probably also worth thinking SBOM is going to be an important thing as well. And so like if a registry is making changes to support SLSA, it might as well support SBOM at the same time.
Yeah, on that front, I know there's a few other folks who are on the Google open source security team who are working on also actually, you know what, never mind. I'm gonna hold off on that for now.
Yeah, and like I know the common SBOM formats. Well, I mean, it seems like the two major ones are Cyclone DX and SPDX. I don't think SWID is as nearly as popular. I think so. Cyclone DX. I don't know if there's multiple serialization formats for that, or if it's always JSON. Does anyone know? Okay, but certainly SPDX supports multiple serialization formats, not just JSON. And I think they currently don't even have a. Oh, okay, so at least Brandon's here. Great, he knows much more than I do. And then I think authentication, the authentication layer of like how the SBOM is signed or whatever, is I think SPDX doesn't even have a recommendation yet. I don't know if Cyclone DX might. But we've also talked about using like the salsa provenance effectively as a way of authenticating that you could say the build process generated both the artifact and its SBOM.
Yeah, so that actually that is the Google open source security team is writing a proposal for that. So yeah, like one of the things I've done myself is just, and it's not that difficult, is just to generate salsa provenance that views the artifact, like the subject, as being the SBOM output. And you know, something like, and that also helps out because yes, you can have in the various SBOM tools and formats. And once again, it's a little often unclear exactly where some of the stuff lives, but there is at least in the modern version of Cyclone DX, and I think in SPDX, there's a way to say, what is the tool that generated this SBOM? But that also kind of leads to sort of a weird sort of recursive problem of like, you're sort of encoding the thing that built the thing inside the thing, you know. It's just, anyway, there's some concerns with like how trustworthy is the tool that actually built it. But anyway, the thing that I think is useful there is it also helps out because you can give the inputs of what you fed into the SBOM generation, so that you know, like, hey, is it that somebody took the resultant container image, use something like Trivy or Sift or whatever, and scan the image and then generated an SBOM out of it? Or did somebody take a package lock file and generate an SBOM out of it, and that sort of thing, which is also, I think, really valuable when like trying to understand, trying to understand the SBOM. Sorry, Brandon.
Yeah. So just to provide a little bit more context, I think we're trying to define that in the SBOM verifier working group. I think the thought is to so I think there are two levels of like trust. One of it is like, where did this document, where was it generated, and then like the trust within each individual field. I think there is a desire within the SBOM community to say that this particular fields came from this vendor and somehow able to trace back the provenance to that. But I think in terms of like at least how it lends itself to salsa, I think there are two different sets of one is just a document being generated and how think that collected all these things and put it together to create the bundle. I think those can be two separate mechanisms. I think it doesn't have to. I think those things don't have to be the mechanism there.
So slightly different direction. Does DISI allow multiple signers?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I was getting worried we're going to have the data 3 different times for 3 different signatures on the same data.
Though I will say, I think the problem, one of the problems we have is some of the tools out there, I think, just like don't check every signature, or they didn't check every, I remember there was at least a few months ago, there were some issues with like, yeah, you could have multiple signatures on there, but some folks were not actually checking all of them. Some tools were not checking all of them.
I don't know that you need to. I think from the recipient standpoint, they would need to have some kind of policy. It says, make sure
Yeah.
this was signed by X. And so you're just looking to that list to see wherever X is in that list.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, sorry. It was more of the there were some tools in there that it was, I think you couldn't really specify. It was, they didn't make it easy to sort of verify individual signatures or whatever. There was some issue anyway.
Mhm.
I don't remember exactly what it was.
So would the recommendation then for distributing, let's say we live in a world where you're distributing both SBOM and salsa provenance, to have like the package, like 3 files, the package, the SBOM, and then a bundle of attestations that covers the artifact and the SBOM.
So probably at some level, I mean, I do think that most likely the things that I would love to be able to see, and this is something that is more for like private repositories than necessarily all the public repositories, is some mechanism to just sort of allow for, you know, arbitrary metadata to be associated with a package. Because obviously as time kind of goes on, one of the things that's kind of opening up is a lot of folks are saying, hey, I want to include some sort of SCA scan, or I want to include some sort of, you know, security stamp of some sort with a package, and being able to kind of almost, and this is the thing where people are saying, like, we might be able to just say, okay, all of those things could be in toto attestations, or metadata associated with in toto attestations, something like that. But to your point, yeah, I think generally it's going to look something like SBOM, salsa, or sorry, SBOM and salsa attestations. And one of the open questions that folks had was, could we use something like the JSON lines or the bundle to just sort of package all of that into a single bundle, right? So as opposed to saying, hey, I have an SBOM, I can have like an SBOM, like a separate SBOM file and a separate salsa bundle or whatever. Could you just store it all in one file if you wanted to?
Yeah, I think that's where I think it would be useful to have like some sort of, maybe we need some sort of workshop or something like that, where we get a bunch of experts in various ecosystems and use cases to know, because I think there's a lot of different trade-offs here. Of one is the different formats you support of JSON versus other things. Another is, if these things are large, do you want to force every client to fetch the entire bundle, or do you want to allow like people to pick and choose? There's, you know, that's like kind of a size versus complexity thing of like, if you have to, it's easy to just fetch a bundle and sort through it, but then it's a big data versus if you could pick and choose, now the API becomes much more complex. You know, you could use like a zip file or something, which is more, maybe allows faster lookup, but then the parsing of the thing becomes a little bit more complex. You know, I think there's a lot of design options and trade-offs that one could make in this space if we're talking about like alternatives. And so it would be good to know, like, I think what we originally recommended here was to lean towards the simplicity of like, let's start with something simple and only add more complex things if needed, which I think is a reasonable approach. But we should validate that with various ecosystems and experts to see if like those things do hold. Because if they don't, then I think it's worth figuring out, like, it would be better to do that now versus like down the road once, like, let's say NPM and Python do the JSON lines thing, but then say it doesn't work at all for Maven because Maven clients have different needs. Let's pretend. I think that'd be an unfortunate situation.
Well, yeah, and I think actually, well, one of the things I'm going to be writing up here, and I know it was one of the things that was sort of discussed, I think a little bit, it might have been in the Maven one, where there was a few folks who were saying with some of the packages, you could potentially embed the attestation directly in the artifact. So something like, imagine, you know, as opposed to saying, I pull down, for example, a Maven jar and then pull down the salsa attestation along with that jar. It's more like, no, the attestation is encoded in the jar file. But I think that sort of thing, I would actually sort of say we probably should not, like, we shouldn't do that much of, right? Because the problem there with that one is, yeah, you get to pull down the attestation along with the artifact, but now you're modifying the thing that the salsa just attested to, unless there was some sort of way to say, hey, I'm pulling down this bundle, which includes also the salsa attestation as well as the jar file. But, you know, you could still sort of separate the jar file from the thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you could treat it like an attached signature. So yeah, you could basically say, you know, like Windows does with DLLs, you just kind of say, okay, well, this is the attestation, and then the rest of it is the thing that the attestation points to, and it's just kind of an attachment that's added to the file, and then when you validate it, you validate the two things separately.
Yeah, with OCI, since everything is a blob store and everything is represented by digest, we just sign the digest and not the raw blob data itself.
Yeah.
So what any opinions on whether that would be a good next step of like getting representatives from the various ecosystems to try to talk together?
Yeah, I definitely think I definitely think we should. But I don't know anybody from those ecosystems outside of Frederick.
I was thinking that maybe the Secure Repositories working group may be a good place. There's like quite a few of them there. This one happens every alternative Wednesday.
Okay, I'll follow. Brandon, why don't I follow up with you then outside this meeting to see next steps?
Okay.
Okay, and so we could, I think, try to get it together, and then maybe we could put together like a very brief thing of like what the objectives are, and we could share it with this group here to make sure like we're on the same page of what we're trying to accomplish. But the I think in summary the goal would be to agree on a model for one, what format we distribute it in, and two, what like where it makes sense, like where it makes sense, a convention for how you fetch these things. Sean, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I just say that, you know, once you've got that kind of outline, I'm happy to kind of, we've got contacts now with Ruby Gems and the Python Packaging Authority, so I can take it to them and get them come along.
Great, yeah. Again, for the format, I'm not saying let's go back to the drawing board. I would start with, well, we have this thing, does it work? And if it works, then we'll just go with it. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that is anybody else? So I know that there was a few folks from, so Brendan Lum, I know there's a few folks from the Google open source security team who have a lot of connections into also a bunch of the package repositories, because I know I see a few folks, for example, on even in the comments here, who know some folks from the Maven side, who know some folks from the PyPI side, and all sorts of other things. Is there people that they can reach out to as well?
Yeah, I think we can help with that. And I'll catch up with Mark and figure out maybe what's a good way to get people together, and then we can go from there.
Cool. So with the last, I guess, 15 minutes, are there any other, or actually before switching topics or anything else, is there anything else anybody wanted to bring up on this topic? Cool. Are there any other topics with like the last 15 minutes or so that we have that folks wanted to bring up from the tooling perspective? Anything that folks wanted to either highlight or I know there's still a lot of gaps in the SLSA tooling space, so just wanted to see if there's anything that folks were working on or wanted to work on or feel like that this group should be working on. Yeah, if not, can end it.
Does anybody know what the status is of DSSE support for OPA, open policy?
Oh, so on that end, I mean, Dizzy is just the envelope type. So I mean, yeah. So I think I'm not sure about OPA itself, like if there's policy, you know, from the policy standpoint, if OPA supports, yeah. So yeah, I think we would just have to reach out to the CNCF folks who were right. It's OPA's CNCF, I think.
Yeah, I can reach out to Ash, see whether he can point us in the right direction for that.
Yeah, I worked on an implementation for Go, which I could convert into a plugin that parses Dizzy and generates Dizzy.
Cool. I think just along those same lines, there's a few other yeah, a lot of these things support signed policies, but not Dizzy directly.
Mhm.
I think that's valuable though, because it just allows us to then, we could do the same sort of thing where you could have a bundle that includes all this stuff, including the policy associated with it and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, cool. If there's nothing else, we can end, you know, for 13 minutes or so early. Let me stop sharing. If I'll see everybody, I guess, next week.
See you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
weekend.
Thank you, bye.